Everyone brought casseroles and flowers, but no one brought space for me to grieve. The smell of wax and lilies made Maggie nauseous. She stood near the back of the chapel, wrapped in a wool coat she hadn't worn in years. It smelled faintly of cedar and old perfume, something her husband used to say reminded him of Christmas. Today, it just reminded her that he was gone. People nodded in her direction as they entered, some giving quick hugs, others choosing the safety of a wave. She nodded back the corners of her mouth, lifting out of habit, not sincerity. The pastor's voice cut gently through the murmur. "You're not alone, Maggie." A moment of silence followed. Maggie's gaze drifted forward past the wooden pews, past the coffin draped in pale blue flowers, to the front row where her daughter Vanessa sat rigidly, hands folded neatly in her lap. Vanessa didn't turn around, not once. The chapel's stained glass windows filtered the grey December light into muted blues and reds. Outside, snow began to fall again, small, shy flakes that vanished on contact with the pavement. Inside, the heat buzzed faintly, and yet Maggie felt chilled in her bones. Not from weather, but from absence. The pastor spoke of unity of family standing strong together. Maggie bit the inside of her cheek. The words sounded like someone reading from a script, sincere in tone, hollow in truth. She folded her arms not from cold, but to hold herself together. When the service ended, people filtered through the aisles, like they always did, slower now, weighted by death. They gave her practiced lines. "He was a good man. He loved you so much. If there's anything you need." But no one asked the only question that mattered. "Where will you be tonight?" On the lawn. Leo, the family dog, sat motionless under the withering maple tree. His fur was greyer now, like everything else. He stared at Maggie, tail still, and then turned away, distracted by nothing in particular. Maggie watched him go. Somehow that hurt more than any speech. Inside, Maggie lingered as guests picked up their coats and murmured about traffic. The casseroles had been neatly arranged on the table near the exit. Someone had labelled them with sticky notes: beef, tuna, gluten-free. No one thought to ask if she even had a refrigerator big enough to keep them all. Vanessa finally walked over. Her heels clicked on the polished floor, loud in the emptiness. "We'll talk after the guests leave," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't cruel. It was careful, distant, like someone placing a fragile glass on a shelf they didn't own. Maggie nodded, even though her hands had begun to tremble. They stood together for a long moment without speaking. The cold light from the stained glass spilled across Vanessa's face, making her eyes look colder than they were. Maggie studied her daughter, the way her mouth tightened, the slight pull in her shoulders. Everything about her screamed fatigue, or maybe detachment. When the room had mostly emptied, Vanessa turned to her and said it. "Mum, we can't carry everything. If you stay, you'll have to help. Real help. Or..." She stopped. The pause wasn't long, but it rang in Maggie's ears louder than the choir had. Maggie didn't respond. She didn't need to. And just like that, I realized I was no longer part of what remained. "You can stay till New Year's," Vanessa said. "But after that, we need the space." The words were spoken gently over a dinner table that felt colder than the wind outside. Maggie stared down at her plate, 2 slices of ham-dry green beans and mashed potatoes that had lost their warmth. No candles, no centerpiece. Just a faint hum from the refrigerator and the clatter of forks that made the silence more obvious. It was 10 days before Christmas. The living room, once filled with garlands and ornaments her husband used to hang, now had only sterile beige walls and a grey sectional sofa. The bookshelf that once held Encyclopedia's family albums and her son's Pinewood Derby trophy now displayed scented candles, a wine rack, and colour-coded storage bins. The air smelled faintly of bleach and lavender. Not memory, not home. Maggie had offered to cook, but Vanessa insisted she was too tired to manage the cleanup afterward. So Maggie sat quietly chewing the meal prepared from store-bought containers while the grandchildren scrolled on their tablets, occasionally lifting their heads to ask, "Is this Grandma?" before returning to their screens. Vanessa cleared her throat. "We thought it'd just be for a week or two," she said, slicing her ham with practiced precision. With Sam working late and the kids needing structure. You know how chaotic things get. Maggie nodded, though she wasn't sure what she was agreeing to. Sam looked up. His eyes met Maggie's for half a second, then slid away. "It's not that we don't want you here," Vanessa continued. "It's just, the space is tight. I work from home now, and the guest room is also the office, and the kids need quiet to study." Maggie glanced at the hallway that led to the spare room. The door was closed, but she remembered every inch of it, the paint chipping on the bottom, the tiny pencil mark where Vanessa had recorded her son's height at age 5. That boy was now 12 and hadn't spoken a full sentence to her all day. She folded her napkin slowly. "This is my house too," she began, but her voice cracked halfway. The truth hung there uninvited awkward, so she let it fall. Vanessa smiled in that way people do when they're delivering bad news packaged as logic. "You know what I mean? You signed everything over when Dad retired. We just thought it'd be better this way." Sam cleared his throat. "Maybe there's a facility or some place you'd feel more supported." Maggie looked at him. His tone wasn't cruel. It was apologetic, but also final. After dinner, Maggie excused herself. She walked upstairs slowly, one hand trailing the wooden banister she once polished every spring. At the top, she paused in the hallway. The walls were bare, no family portraits, no stitched quote from her mother, no holiday garlands. When she entered the guest room, something tugged at her immediately. She turned toward the bookshelf. Her wedding photo, she and Richard under the oak tree hands, clasped eyes, laughing, was gone. In its place, a photo of Vanessa's family taken at a pumpkin patch last fall. Everyone wore matching sweaters, even the dog. Below it, a small cage sat where Maggie once kept her knitting basket. Inside, a fat orange cat blinked slowly at her, then turned around and curled up. The rocking chair was gone too. She looked around, blinking slowly. She didn't say it outright, but my daughter had evicted me with a smile. "It's just temporary," I told myself, holding the pen, but something inside me knew better. The bus shuddered over a patch of black ice, waking Maggie from her shallow half-sleep. The early morning outside the frosted window was grey and unfamiliar. She tugged her coat tighter around her shoulders, her knees pressed against the small cardboard box that held the last pieces of a life no longer welcome. Next to her, a nylon bag with 2 sweaters, a Bible, and a tin of mints. In the seat ahead, someone sneezed. Farther back, a baby cried faintly, the sound absorbed by the worn fabric of the bus's interior. She replayed Vanessa's voice in her head. "You're strong, Mom. You'll figure it out." No malice, just distance. The kind of distance people place between themselves and guilt. The bus sighed to a stop. Maggie stepped down her boots, crunching in the thin crust of snow that covered the cracked pavement. It was New Year's Day. No balloons, no countdowns, just the hush of a world moving on without her. Claire was waiting, clipboard in hand, hair too neat for someone awake this early. "You're right on time," she said, offering a handshake like a receipt. "Let's get through this quickly. Cold's not letting up today." They stood outside a large gate iron, rusted at the hinges, creaking faintly when pushed open. Behind it loomed the house, a faded American villa, 2 stories, white paint flaking like dry skin. No smoke from the chimney, No footprints, but the ones Claire had made walking in. He's old, stubborn, doesn't like noise, doesn't like people, frankly. Claire rattled off as they walked. But the pay's solid, you get your own room, and he rarely speaks unless you're late with his pills. Inside the entryway, the warmth was absent. The air smelled of dust and something sweetly metallic, the kind of smell that lingers in houses with history and silence. Claire handed over the contract, 3 pages, small font legal language that had no use for sentiment. Sign here, and initial this box. Maggie held the pen. Her fingers trembled slightly from the cold, or maybe the moment. It's just temporary, she whispered and signed. Claire nodded briskly. Your room's upstairs, 3rd on the left. He's downstairs for now. I'll call when he's ready. Maggie carried her box and bag up the stairs. The hallway creaked with each step, like it hadn't adjusted to a new rhythm in years. At her door, she paused, breathing in the stillness. The room was bare, 1 twin bed, a nightstand, a narrow window facing nothing in particular. She set the box on the bed and slowly opened it. On top was her wedding photo, she and Richard smiling in the sun arms around each other like the world was soft and knowable. Next to it, the last letter he had written. Her folded so many times, the creases had begun to fade. She read the first line, then stopped. There was no need to read it again. She knew every word. She placed the letter gently in the nightstand drawer. The photo followed, face down. She closed the drawer quietly. Downstairs, the ticking of a grandfather clock filled the silence. Maggie stepped into the living room. Shelves lined with hardbound books, their titles dulled with dust. Curtains drawn halfway. A broken lamp. No sound, but the clock, each tick a soft reminder of how far she was from anyone who knew her name beyond a formality. At the end of the hallway, the front door opened slightly. Leo stood there. The dog from the funeral. He must have wandered back, or perhaps he had always belonged here. He didn't bark. He just looked at her, unmoving, calm, as if deciding. Then he turned and sat down at the threshold. Mrs. Ellison, Claire's voice echoed from upstairs. He's ready to meet you. Try not to take anything personally. If you're here to babysit me, you can leave now, he said, without looking up. Maggie stopped 2 steps inside the room. The air was thick with the scent of old paper menthol cream and something bitter, perhaps camphor or unused anger. Heavy curtains blocked the morning drizzle, letting in just enough light to cast long, slanted shadows across the oak floor. The windows hadn't been opened in a long time. It felt less like a living space and more like a sealed vault where time had been asked politely not to pass. Raymond Pierce sat in a worn leather chair near the fireplace, though the hearth was empty. A thick green blanket covered his knees. His head was tilted down, eyes scanning a book whose title Maggie couldn't see. Leo lay curled at his feet, breathing slow tail still. The dog opened one eye briefly, then closed it again. Maggie couldn't tell if she had passed or failed whatever unspoken test they were performing. She took another step in. Good morning, Mr. Pierce. He made a small sound, something between a scoff and a sigh. How old are you? He asked still without looking up. 67, she replied, folding her hands in front of her like a schoolteacher awaiting a parent's judgment. He nodded, then gestured to the side table. Tea. Black. 3 minutes, exactly. No sugar, no milk. Don't stir. Stirring bruises the leaves. Maggie blinked, but said nothing. She turned and walked quietly to the kitchenette Claire had pointed out earlier. The kettle hissed as it boiled, and she counted the seconds in her head, eyes fixed on the rain streaking the narrow window. When she returned with the tea, she placed it gently on the coaster already set out. Raymond didn't thank her. Instead, he lifted the cup and inhaled deeply, then sipped once and set it down with a precision that made Maggie feel like she'd just taken a test without knowing it had started. "Don't touch the third bookcase," he said. "That one's not for reading. It's for memory." She nodded. "Don't adjust the curtains. Light bothers me when it comes from the left." Another nod. "And don't move anything on this table. I know where everything is. If something disappears, I'll assume it was stolen, not misplaced." Leo let out a quiet huff, as if mirroring his master's disapproval. Maggie kept her posture straight, her expression unreadable. She had been a wife, a mother, a silent partner to hundreds of decisions never really hers. She knew how to keep her voice still while her mind worked. Raymond finally closed his book, marking the page with a torn piece of envelope. He looked up at her, his eyes sharp but not unkind. More like someone watching an incoming storm, trying to decide if it would pass or stay. "Why do you need this job?" he asked. Maggie met his gaze evenly. "Because I have no home." There was a flicker almost too small to see, a small adjustment in his jaw, a softening that didn't reach his eyes. He said nothing more. Later that evening, after the light had dimmed and the rain turned to sleet, Maggie returned to her room. She removed her coat, folded it neatly, then sat on the edge of the bed, grateful for the silence, but wary of the stillness. As she turned down the pillow, her fingers touched something firm beneath the fabric. A notebook. Old. Leather-bound. No name. She opened it. Inside, neat block handwriting filled the first few pages, rules, schedules, reminders about medication and groceries. On page 10, a list of preferred meals. On page 15, a sentence underlined twice in red ink. "Whatever you do, don't ask about room 109. Maggie looked up. The hallway was quiet shadows, thick along the floorboards. Room 109 was at the end of the corridor. Its door was shut, but not locked. She walked toward it slowly, her fingers brushing the wall for balance. When she reached the door, she rested her hand lightly on the knob. She paused and turned away. The house creaks even when no one moves, or maybe someone does. The wind had changed that week. Stronger now, less of a breeze, more of a breath pressed hard against the windows. At night, Maggie could hear it wrapping around the house like a shawl too tight for comfort. The second floor creaked in soft places it hadn't before. The ceiling ticked. Floorboards shifted without weight. The air felt thinner somehow, as if the walls were waiting for something. Maggie had lived inside silence before. As a widow, as a guest in her daughter's house, as a stranger in rooms not hers. But this silence was different. It was full, not empty. One night, just past midnight, she heard it again, a soft knock. Not at her door. Not loud. Just 3 quiet taps. Then nothing. She stood still in bed, listening. No footsteps. No doors opening. Only the familiar ticking from downstairs. In the morning, as she prepared breakfast, Raymond eyed her from the head of the table. His teacup steamed gently beside him. He was wearing the same grey cardigan he wore every morning, and his hands were wrapped around the spoon like it was an anchor to something older than routine. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, not looking up. Then with the faintest hint of a smirk. Or did the house introduce itself? Maggie stirred the oatmeal slowly. "It's an old place," she said. "It talks." Raymond didn't respond. Later that day, while wiping down the kitchen shelves, she noticed something in the far back corner, a tin box with peeling paint tucked behind some expired canned fruit. She reached for it, hands brushing the cold edge. When she opened it, a small music box sat inside. Its surface was cracked, the ballerina on top missing an arm. She wound it gently. The melody began hesitant halting, as though waking from sleep. Just as the third note climbed, it stopped abruptly. Raymond's voice came sharp and sudden from the hallway. "Don't touch what's not yours." Maggie turned. He was standing with his cane, Leo, beside him. Neither moved. "I thought it was broken," she said quietly. "It is," he said, then turned and walked away. That afternoon Claire called. Her voice was businesslike, too brisk for pleasantries. "Just checking in," she said. "Has Mr. Pierce mentioned anything unusual? Unusual rooms? Schedules? Any habits?" Maggie hesitated. "He's precise." "Right," Claire replied. Then, after a beat, "Just a reminder. Room 109 is for storage, not for use. Keep it shut. You don't want him upset." Before Maggie could ask more, Claire had hung up. By early evening, the sky had dimmed to a pale slate. Maggie took the duster upstairs. The hallway was quiet, save for Leo's occasional sigh from downstairs. As she passed room 109, something caught her eye, a thin slip of paper lodged in the doorframe, barely visible. She bent down and pulled it free. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, as if written by a hand no longer familiar with letters. He forgets, but the room doesn't. Maggie stared at the words. The hallway suddenly felt colder, though the thermostat hadn't changed. She slipped the note into her pocket and walked on. That night, as she climbed the stairs, she saw Leo at the far end of the hallway. He was sitting in front of room 109, not barking, not growling, just still watching the door, as if guarding it. "You think silence protects you," she said softly, "but it only makes you forget how to be heard." The rain came lightly at first, tapping the tall windows with rhythmless patience. It was a quiet Saturday. No phone calls, no footsteps in the hallway, no signs of Claire's rushed professionalism. Just the ticking of the mantel clock and the occasional soft groan from the old beams overhead. The house had settled into itself. Maggie stepped into the study, with the tea tray balanced in both hands. She didn't announce herself. After 2 weeks, she'd learned Raymond preferred her presence quiet and predictable, like the steam rising from his favorite black tea, measured, contained, unspoken. But today, something was different. He wasn't reading. He sat with his elbows on the chair's arms, hands folded loosely in his lap, eyes fixed not on the pages before him, but on a space just above the fireplace. A place no one ever looks unless they're not really seeing. She placed the tea on the coaster, careful not to disturb anything on the table. The photo frame that usually sat face down still rested that way, ignored, like a memory kept under lock. Raymond blinked, but didn't look at her. "It's raining," Maggie said gently. "Hmm?" She sat on the edge of the nearby chair, not the one too close, not the one too far. The position they'd silently negotiated over several days. He reached for the tea and sipped. Then, setting it down, said, "People remember pain when it's convenient." Maggie tilted her head. "Convenient or unavoidable?" Raymond didn't answer. She waited. Elder patience was not silence. It was endurance, honed into stillness. "I didn't cry when my husband died," she said, her voice low. "There was a grandchild in the house, playing games on my phone, laughing. I thought, if I cried, I'd scare him. So I waited. Still no response." She continued, "Grief doesn't always show up dressed for the occasion. Sometimes it wears slippers and forgets to speak." Raymond shifted slightly in his chair. Leo curled nearby, let out a groan, not distressed, just uncomfortable, and stood up. The dog gave Maggie a glance she couldn't quite read before walking to the door and nudging it open with his nose. He disappeared into the hallway without a sound. Maggie let the silence stretch again. "I think you know that feeling," she said, her voice even. "The one where everything stops but you're expected to keep making tea." Raymond stirred. Slowly he stood, The movement surprised her not because of its speed, but because of its intent. He walked to the doorway, stopped there with his hand resting on the frame. She used to say that too, he murmured. Maggie looked up. He didn't turn around. Room 109 used to be hers, he said, then left. The rain had grown heavier, beating now with more purpose. Maggie remained in the chair, fingers lightly curled around the edge of her skirt. The mantel clock ticked. And for the first time she noticed the photo frame had shifted, no longer face down, a photo of a little girl, blonde, blurred by time, or maybe by something more deliberate. She didn't touch it. She just looked. The door was ajar, not wide, but just enough to whisper, "You saw this coming." Maggie stood in the hallway, the early light of morning slipping through the cracked curtain at the end. The house was unusually still, wrapped in a velvet hush. Even the rain outside, which had lingered for days, now paused, as though not to interfere. Room 109 breathed faintly, as if it too had just awakened. She hadn't meant to come here, not deliberately. But her steps had wandered quietly in socked feet through the carpeted hall until she found herself here again. This time the door didn't resist. She didn't push, just leaned forward, letting the narrow gap open a fraction more. The scent came first. A mix of faded baby powder dust-laced paper and something sweeter like strawberries long past ripe. A floral blanket was neatly folded over a twin bed, and a child's desk, chipped at the corners, sat beneath a cloudy window. A small teddy bear rested on the pillow, one eye missing its fur worn at the ears. She stepped inside, not intruding, just entering. Her hands remained at her sides. She did not touch. The room held its breath around her. Drawings were pinned carefully to a bulletin board, crayon suns and trees, a woman with a long dress, a man with round glasses. Maggie's eyes scanned the margins. Some were signed Nora, some weren't signed at all. The notebook lay open on the desk. The pen beside it had dried in mid-thought. She leaned in. The page was dated. Years ago. No month. Just October. "I'm sorry I yelled. I know I broke the rule. But I missed Mom and didn't know what to do. I didn't mean to ruin things. I promise I'll be better if you talk to me again." The handwriting was uneven child's script, teetering between anger and apology. Maggie swallowed. Her mouth had dried, though she hadn't spoken a word. She stepped back. Leo's soft moan came from behind. The dog hadn't followed her in. He lay in the hallway, head down, ears tilted, not guarding, waiting. She backed out slowly, letting the door close without latch. The house resumed its quiet, as if nothing had stirred. She carried nothing, took no item, not even a slip of paper. But something had entered her instead. Later, she found Raymond in the study. He didn't look up, just turned a page from a heavy book that looked like it hadn't been read in years. She stood near the edge of the carpet, far enough to give him space, close enough to speak. She liked Little Women, didn't she? He froze. The page he was turning halted mid-motion. "She's not part of the job," he said without looking. "Don't mention her again." Maggie nodded. That was all. She returned to her room. That night, the house remained quiet. The rain returned. And on the coffee table, neatly centered without ceremony, lay a worn copy of Little Women. Raymond never said a word. "You still write letters?" Raymond asked. Even when no one reads them, Maggie looked up from her notebook, the pen still warm between her fingers. She didn't answer him right away. The room was wrapped in amber light, a rare gentleness in a house built on shadows. Outside snow had begun to fall, tracing delicate lines across the glass. Inside, the stillness breathed alongside her thoughts. Raymond had spoken without his usual edge. No accusation. just a question. Perhaps even curiosity. She closed the notebook, gently smoothing the edge of the last page with her thumb. When Raymond went upstairs for his afternoon rest, Maggie returned to her own room. It had grown familiar now, soft wool blanket, a ceramic lamp that gave off a muted glow, and a desk that faced the window. This was her time, when the house loosened its grip, when even silence dared to exhale. She picked up a fresh page. "Dear woman I used to be," she wrote. The words flowed easily now, each letter etched slowly, not for anyone else to read, but to keep herself from dissolving into a past that no longer spoke back. She wrote of things she'd never said aloud, how she used to hum while folding laundry, how her husband once left wildflowers on the dashboard, how Vanessa stopped saying mom and started saying you the year after college, and how none of those things had a proper funeral. That evening she folded the letter, neatly stepped into the parlour, and placed it into the small fireplace. She lit it carefully, watched it burn into curls of memory. The ashes didn't rise. They settled. The next day, while changing linens, she found a note she had left near the kitchen. A few lines jotted in passing meant for no one. Yet there it was, back on her dresser. Uncreased, unspoken, returned. Raymond said nothing. At lunch, he stirred his soup absent-mindedly and asked if no one cares what we carry. Why do we carry it? Maggie didn't look up from her plate. Because it's what proves we lived, she said. He didn't reply, but Leo, who now rested beside her chair more often than Raymond's, let out a long sigh, as if in agreement. That afternoon, a letter arrived. It was from Claire, clipped with a pale yellow sticky note that read, "From Vanessa." Maggie sat by the fireplace before opening it. Her hands were steady. "Mum," it began, "we've been sorting through Dad's boxes and really need the storage key. The stuff is taking up too much space." She paused after reading the sentence, then folded the letter in half. Not in anger, not even surprise. She let her hand rest on the curve of her teacup, still warm from the morning. Then she smiled. At first it was a bitter smile, the kind that recognizes truth too late to change it. Even the dead can be evicted, it seems. "Good morning," Maggie Raymond said. It was the first time he used her name. The sun filtered gently through the bare branches, painting faint shadows on the frosted lawn. Maggie stood at the edge of the backyard, her hands wrapped around a metal watering can that had lost its paint in patches. The plants she tended were dry, some brittle, but still she watered them not for revival, but for rhythm. Raymond didn't approach her right away. She sensed him watching from the porch. The quiet between them was no longer filled with tension. It had softened into something neutral, almost respectful. He held 2 cups of tea on a tray. No instructions this time. No 3-minute rules. Just tea. "You're not what I expected," he said, placing the tray on the small iron table beside her. Then, with a pause that felt like it had taken weeks to arrive, he added, "Maggie." She didn't reply, just nodded, set down the watering can, and took her seat beside him. The chair creaked under her, but it was a familiar sound now, like an old joint clicking back into place. Leo wandered past them, then lay in the snow shadow of a dormant bush belly, down nose twitching towards something unseen. When Raymond called him, the dog didn't move. For once, Maggie smiled to herself, knowing she wasn't the only one who had stopped answering right away. They sipped their tea in silence. Later that afternoon, Maggie was organizing the pantry when the landline rang. She picked up, thinking it was a routine call from Claire. "Maggie, is Mr. Pierce nearby?" Claire asked, her voice clipped. "I can get him," she said, handing the phone to Raymond. She didn't intend to eavesdrop, but the hallway echoed too easily. "I understand." "Yes, I know what that means." No, I don't need to see the file. Raymond's voice was steadier than expected. When will they decide? A pause. Then it's their house, technically. Let them sell it. The call ended. Raymond returned the receiver with unusual care, then stood in the doorway for a moment, as if reconsidering whether to say something. Finally, he turned to Maggie. If I become someone else's burden, would you forget me too? The room was quiet. The question, though softly spoken, was heavy with resignation. Maggie didn't look up right away. She folded the dish towel in her hand, aligned its corners, and set it on the counter. Then, meeting his eyes, she answered with a calm certainty, I never forgot anyone who let me in, not even those who didn't. So, you're the new furniture, the woman said, not bothering to shake my hand. Maggie stood by the fireplace, hands calmly folded, her eyes meeting the young woman's with neither submission nor defiance. The sun poured through the tall windows, golden but sterile. It lit the dust, not the warmth. The woman's heels clicked on the wooden floor with an assertiveness Maggie had long forgotten in herself. Allison was all edges, sharply pressed trousers, a high collar, no perfume, only the faint metallic scent of drive and disinterest. She didn't sit. She examined, pulled back curtains, tapped on door frames, photographed the kitchen tiles. Claire had warned Maggie via phone the night before. She's here to assess. Just stay neutral. You're not the issue. Maggie wasn't so sure about that. Raymond sat silently in his chair, a thick cardigan draped over him like armor. He looked smaller today, not physically, but in the way a person seems to take up less space when they no longer claim it. Allison opened her tablet and began speaking into her headset, walking the perimeter of the room, as if she were appraising a museum relic. Built 1947, signs of damp near chimney, live-in caregiver presence, undocumented agreement. Then suddenly she turned to Maggie. Grandpa needs structure, not someone playing tea parties with his guilt. Maggie tilted her head. Her voice came soft, but not weak. Sometimes guilt needs someone to drink tea with. Allison's eyebrow twitched. She moved on. By noon, the house had been inventoried not in boxes, but in judgment. Raymond hadn't spoken once. After Allison left the room to take a call on the porch, Maggie sat beside him. She didn't ask questions. She didn't comfort. They just watched Leo sleep near the doorway, his tail occasionally twitching. Later that afternoon, as she cleared the tea things, Allison returned with finality. This house won't need a live-in anymore, she said crisply. I'll handle things remotely. Raymond didn't look up. Maggie looked at him, waited, willed him, but he said nothing. That evening the house grew colder, not from the temperature but from something deeper, like the air had changed alliances. Maggie moved through the hallways, slowly checking windows, drawing curtains. As she passed room 109, she stopped. There it was, a low, wavering melody, notes unhurried, echoing softly from within. A piano. But the piano had no strings. You're not family, Allison snapped. Maggie replied, sometimes that's what makes us brave. The office felt smaller today. The morning light slanted through the window in narrow bands, cold and sterile. Papers were stacked pens, arranged with clinical precision. A thin film of frost clung to the outside of the glass. Allison stood with a manila folder in her hand, sharp-edged and ready. Across from her, Maggie sat without a coat, without armor, but not without presence. Between them, the air held something taut and unfinished. Raymond remained near the window, his gaze fixed on the garden beyond, face unreadable. He looked like a man attending a meeting about someone else's life. Allison dropped the folder onto the table. Pre-approved, she said. Doctor just needs to confirm in person. After that, we proceed. Maggie opened the folder slowly. The nursing facilities brochure slipped out, too glossy, too hopeful. The form already had Raymond's name typed in block letters. "Did he sign this?" she asked, voice even. "He doesn't need to," Allison replied quickly. "I have power of attorney." Maggie turned to Raymond. "Do you agree?" He didn't speak. His hands rested on the arms of the chair, unmoving. The ticking clock in the hallway filled the silence each second, dragging its heels. "You have no say in this," Allison hissed. "You're not family." Maggie met her eyes calm as lake water before a storm. "Neither do you, until he speaks." Leo curled beside Maggie's feet, suddenly lifted his head. A low growl rumbled from his chest, not loud, but unmistakable. Allison stepped back instinctively. The landline rang. Maggie picked it up. It was Claire. "The doctor wants to assess Mr. Pierce in person. He's delaying the transfer for a week. Please inform everyone," Claire said briskly. Maggie hung up and relayed the message. Allison frowned, clearly annoyed. "Fine. But this doesn't change anything." She gathered her papers and left heels echoing sharply through the hallway. That evening the house was quiet again. Maggie made tea, but left it untouched. The confrontation had passed, but its weight still lingered. She sat at Raymond's desk and took out a small note card. In her careful, looping handwriting, she wrote, "You can choose silence, but silence is still a choice." She folded the card in half and placed it beside the clock, knowing he would see it in the morning. The next day, Maggie woke early. When she stepped into the living room, she found Raymond already seated by the window, dressed, neatly combed. In his hands, the yellowed letter from room 109, the one Nora wrote long ago. He looked up, but said nothing. "I remember her voice," Raymond whispered. "It used to fill this house." The fire burned low in the bookroom, casting amber shadows on the spines of old books. Outside, snow clung softly to the windowsills. Inside it was neither warm nor cold, just still. Raymond sat with Leo curled beside him, the dog's head resting on his leg like a quiet pact. Maggie didn't speak. She sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone lukewarm. The silence between them was no longer hollow. It was listening. She was 7 when Lila died. Raymond began voice thin but steady. Too young to understand death, but old enough to learn silence. He paused, eyes flicking toward the fire. The flame cracked softly like breath catching in a throat. "She thought I didn't love her enough. And perhaps I didn't know how," he continued. "Lila had warmth. I had rules. Nora was more her mother than me. And that made me afraid." Maggie shifted slightly but said nothing. "She left at 18, he said. Left a note. No accusations. Just one sentence. I need to stop pretending I'm not someone else." He reached behind his chair and pulled out an old hardcover book. Edges, worn spine, softened with time. From its middle, he withdrew a small metal pen, the kind given as a gift. He held it like it was breakable. For Nora, he read aloud, eyes glistening. "Who never forgot to feel." Maggie watched the flame dance in his eyes. "I kept everything the same in her room," he added, voice quieter. "Not because I hoped she'd return, but because I wasn't ready to leave." The room held its breath. "If she came back," Maggie said gently, "what would you say?" Raymond didn't hesitate. That she was never wrong to leave, only I was. Leo sighed at his feet, shifting slightly as if giving permission for that truth to finally settle. No apologies, no redemption, just admission. Maggie stood, walked slowly toward him and reached for the pen. He let her take it without question. She didn't explain. She only slipped it into her pocket. Her eyes shimmered, not from sorrow, but from the weight of having heard what no one else had waited to hear. "Let's make this quick," Allison said. "I don't like drawn-out goodbyes." Raymond replied, "Good. I never said you were staying." The dining room was unusually still. Sunlight streamed in at an angle, warming the old wood panels, but not the air between the three people at the long table. The white tablecloth stretched neatly beneath a pile of manila folders pens and a silver envelope no one had touched yet. Allison sat upright. Crisp blazer unwrinkled her hand, resting lightly on Dean's. Dean, younger, more polished, looked around the room with mild disdain, as though every antique chair carried too much dust and not enough value. Raymond sat at the head of the table, back straight. Maggie stood just behind him, silent hands folded. Leo lay curled at his feet, eyes half shut, not sleeping. Listening, Allison opened her briefcase with a snap. "These are the forms to transfer the estate temporarily to a family trust. It helps reduce tax exposure and speeds up elder care placement." Dean added, "It's for his best interest. We have all the legal ground. Power of attorney through next of kin financial efficiency, long-term care strategy." Raymond said nothing. He simply looked at Maggie and then opened the silver envelope. He didn't rush. He unfolded each sheet with care, laying it out on the table in front of him. Maggie stepped forward, slightly confused, but Raymond gestured gently for her to stay. "I had this prepared last week," he said. "Signed, notarized, filed." He looked at Allison. "You're not the only one who knows how to use a notary." Allison's eyes narrowed. "What is this?" "My last will," Raymond said. "No assets, no divisions, no gifts. Just one declaration." Dean leaned over, scanning the document. "This has no financial standing. There are no items listed, no bequests." "Correct," Raymond said. "What I leave is not a thing. It's a name. Nora's. And no one gets to erase it." He turned to Maggie. "And this house, it isn't mine to give. It's not even mine to keep. But someone needs to remember what it was. Someone who won't sell the echoes for square footage." Maggie's lips parted, but she said nothing. Her hands trembled slightly as she received the envelope from him. It wasn't heavy, but it carried something sacred. "This house is no longer a place," Raymond said quietly. "It's a memory. You're its keeper now." Across the table, Allison's expression cracked. For a moment, something flickered, perhaps confusion, perhaps resentment, perhaps a recognition she didn't want. Then she stood, gathered the folders with a sharp sweep. "This isn't over," she said flatly. Dean followed eyes, flicking once more at Maggie, then at the dog, as if expecting the house to argue. They walked out into the pale afternoon light. Maggie watched them go. Then she turned back to Raymond. Did it feel like justice? Raymond didn't look at her. He watched the sun retreat slowly along the edge of the table. "No," he said. But it felt clean. Maggie folded a fresh bedsheet. "I think I'll stay in room 109, she said. Raymond nodded. She would have liked that. The afternoon sun spilled through the open curtains, washing room 109 in a soft gold that touched every corner. For the first time, the air didn't feel like it belonged to someone lost. It felt like it belonged to someone present. Maggie moved slowly, not out of fatigue, but with care. She didn't rearrange much. The floral blanket remained on the bed, though she smoothed it with her palms until every wrinkle surrendered. The desk still held its quiet weight in the corner. Maggie placed a fresh teacup beside a folded towel on the shelf. Leo lay at the threshold, eyes closed, chin resting on his paws. He hadn't come in, not yet. But for the first time he seemed at peace outside the door, no longer guarding something broken. Maggie opened the old drawer. Inside were the same small trinkets, an empty perfume bottle, a dried flower between pages of a notebook. She didn't take anything out. She simply slipped in a note, folded once. This is not an end. From behind, she heard Raymond's footsteps pause. He didn't enter. He stood silently, one hand on the doorframe, his eyes tracing the familiar outlines that time had dulled, but not erased. Then he turned away. That night, Maggie sat by the fireplace in the main hall. A small envelope rested on her lap, the latest from Claire, forwarded from Vanessa. No note, just the storage archive key Raymond had once asked for, and a name written neatly on the front, Margaret Ann Lewis. She held the envelope a moment longer before placing it on the table beside her. Later, she sat at the desk in room 109 with a pen and clean paper. The letter she wrote to Vanessa wasn't long. You are always welcome, but I no longer wait. Mom. No blame, no pleading, just a line drawn not as defense, but as foundation. The sun was dipping low when Maggie stood in front of the mirror by the window. The light touched her shoulders, caught strands of silver in her hair. She didn't look away. For the first time in years, her reflection didn't feel like something to avoid. It was a woman who had stayed not because she was asked to, but because she chose to. A quiet bark pulled her gaze to the hallway. Leo had raised his head. From outside came the distant sound of tires on gravel. A car. Maggie stood slowly. She didn't rush. She smoothed her blouse, adjusted the curtain, and walked to the front hallway, where light and shadow met on the floorboards. If it's her, she said more to herself than anyone else, I'll open the door. If not, I'll close it gently. You're still here, Vanessa said, stepping into the foyer. Maggie smiled. So are the walls. Funny how they outlive our love. The late afternoon sun poured through the frosted glass, spilling long shadows across the entrance hall. It colored the wood floor with quiet amber and made the dust in the air shimmer like memory refusing to settle. Vanessa stood just inside the door, her coat still on, clutching a folder full of papers, stapled, highlighted clinical. She didn't look around. Her eyes didn't rise to meet the chandelier or the paintings or even Maggie's face. She was there to finalize something. Dad said years ago that everything would come to me. Eventually, she began flipping the folder open. This is just to simplify things. For tax purposes. You know how messy memory can be when it isn't filed properly. Maggie didn't reply. She simply waited. Vanessa held out a page. If you could sign here, it'd clear the ancillary items, furniture, rooms, belongings, including whatever's in 109. The words hung. Maggie stepped forward, glanced down at the lines, then back up. Her voice didn't rise. There is nothing of yours here, she said softly. Including me? Vanessa stiffened. I'm not here to fight. You came with forms, Maggie replied, not flowers. There was a flicker in Vanessa's eyes, something not anger, but something brittle. You never made it easy. You always held on to things that didn't belong to you. Guilt. Space. Dad. I held on, Maggie said, because someone had to. Vanessa took a sharp breath, as if pulling something sharp into her chest. You're a parasite, she muttered. Living in other people's homes, other people's stories. Leo, curled by the fireplace, raised his head. He didn't growl. He simply looked. Maggie walked to the hallway drawer and returned with a small box no bigger than a book. She handed it to Vanessa. Inside were photographs of a young girl in yellow mittens, of birthday cakes, half melted, of a man smiling with tired eyes. Tucked beneath them was a letter, unopened, yellowed with time. I found it, after he passed, Maggie said. He never sent it. I think he wanted to, but didn't know how. Vanessa looked at the box, but didn't open it. "You don't have to read it," Maggie said. "But I've done my part. You can throw it away if that's what you need." Vanessa held the box like it might bite. She didn't say goodbye, just turned, walked out the door, and let it shut behind her without sound. Later, as the sun finished bleeding out of the sky and Raymond still slept, Maggie checked the mailbox out of habit. There, resting on top of a stack of coupons and bills, was a note in handwriting she still recognized. "I didn't throw it away. Yet." Maggie stood in the dusk, the paper crinkling between her fingers. She didn't smile, but she breathed full, steady, and certain. "I still remember," she whispered. And that was enough. Raymond asked, "Will you stay after I'm gone?" Maggie folded his blanket. "No, but I won't take anything either." The light outside was the soft grey of early snow, quiet and watchful. The trees in the backyard stood bare, their limbs stretched toward a sky, still deciding whether to brighten or sleep a little longer. Maggie's breath curled in the cold air as she stepped outside one last time, with Leo padding softly behind her. The suitcase beside the door was small, just enough for the items she had brought when she arrived. No more. No less. Inside the house was still. Not empty, just paused, like it knew someone was leaving but refused to mourn. Raymond sat in his chair, wrapped in the same woolen shawl Maggie had washed just 2 nights before. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes were steady, following her every movement. "I'm not scared," he said almost to himself. "I'm just not as full." Maggie nodded, folding another shirt into the suitcase. "That's okay. You've emptied yourself into someone else. That's all we ask, isn't it?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His gaze was warm, unblinking. The phone rang once. Maggie answered quietly. The voice on the other end, Dr. Lowell, confirmed what she already knew. The ICU room was ready. The transfer would happen in 2 days. She hung up and walked over to Raymond. In her hand was the small slip of paper with the door code scribbled clearly. She laid it next to the teacup. Then she bent down and kissed his forehead. "You're not going to vanish," she said. "I've read you." Raymond smiled faintly, his fingers brushing Leo's head. Leo whined as Maggie picked up the suitcase. But he didn't follow her. He simply lay near the door, eyes open, breathing slow. Maggie stepped out into the morning. Her boots made soft prints in the snow alongside older ones now fading. The bus stop wasn't far. Just enough time to feel the chill settle into her skin, enough time for the house to disappear behind bare branches. On board, Maggie found a window seat and placed the small bag on her lap. She opened her notebook. Inside, folded and yellowing slightly, was the last letter she had written to no one but herself. "Dear self, you were never erased, just unread. Now I've read you." The ink had smudged slightly from when her fingers brushed it days ago. As the bus turned the final corner, Maggie looked out. There, not far from the road, stood a small house with a blue porch, weathered, plain, unassuming, but the kind of place someone might fill with teacups and quiet mornings. She didn't smile, but she spoke. "Maybe it's time I build something of my own." And the road kept going. No one chased her away this time. She left with nothing but her name intact and her silence full of meaning. In a world where memory can be bought and forgotten, she chose to carry hers like a quiet verdict. Justice may arrive late, but it resonates like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody. Sometimes preserving your truth is the boldest kind of revenge. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below. Type 1 if you resonate with this story.